Okay, how long can they hold it? How long can they hold it?
Look, we are seeking to bring him back. We're seeking to have him released, and we're going to do that whether it's in federal court or an immigration court. There are limits to how long a person can be held in immigration court, but frankly, that's irrelevant because we are going to ask for him to be released as expeditiously as possible, and we will do that in any court that will hear us.
Yeah, the government has basically admitted that they're punishing him for his views that are contrary to the government's views. And that's just an obvious piece of authoritarian logic that we cannot tolerate as long as we live in a democracy. It's totally unacceptable for him and for others.
The government is claiming, and this is really a question for the government. The government is claiming that because of the time he filed a habeas corpus petition in this court, he was already in New Jersey. They had already moved him to New Jersey as part of their plan, again, to move him 1,000 miles away to Louisiana, to take him away from this court, from his lawyers, from his support network. And of course, the goal in all of this is to silence not just Mahmoud, but to silence anyone who will speak in defense of Palestinian lives and rights. And clearly, as you can see by the thousands of people who have come out, not just today, but this past week, that is backfiring. People are not silenced. People are not bowed in any way, shape, or form. And this idea that the movement in supporting Palestinian lives is somehow driven and supported mainly by foreigners and non-citizens and individuals who are marginalized is clearly false. It is an American movement, and of course there are non-citizens and green card holders as well. But it is mainstream, as you can see from the diverse crowd that has come out, not just here today, but campuses nationwide for the past year.
Yesterday, the White House press secretary made an allegation against your client that he organized protests where Hamas propaganda was distributed. Can you guys address that?
The government's position is that Mahmoud has views that are similar to Hamas, namely that Mahmoud believes in Palestinian human rights and the end to an ongoing genocide. And it is for that reason, as the White House and the Department of Homeland Security have said, that he has been arrested, detained, and potentially removed. So it's their disagreement with his viewpoint, not any remotely scintilla of security threat that's driving this. Again, it's about repression. It's not about security.
I would add that whatever flyers the White House spokesperson may have been talking about, that has certainly not been the government's position in court. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that the White House spokesperson says a lot of things that are unsubstantiated, not just on this case. I would pay attention to what they actually, put forward in court. I mean, as you can imagine, these are very difficult circumstances. Mahmoud and his wife, the last thing they expected was for something like this to happen. They had every reason to expect stability. He's a lawful permanent resident. She's a U.S. citizen. They're about to welcome their firstborn child next month. That's what they were thinking about, not this scenario where he's abducted, coming home at night, and rendered to a location 1,000 miles away by the U.S. government on account of his speech. In light of that, Mahmoud, of course, is a fighter. He's been a prominent advocate for Palestinian rights. He's equally unbowed. He's in good spirits considering these circumstances, and he looks forward to being back here at home in New York.
The question is about immediate next steps. We will be filing amended papers demonstrating joined by our colleagues from the ACLU and the New York Civil Liberties Union, filing amended papers that substantiate in more detail the unlawful nature of his detention, and thereafter we'll pursue an expedited schedule to have the court hear his demand that his detention is unlawful and that he should be released. And we will also be dealing with the government's claim that this court is not the proper venue, and largely at the same time over the next week.
What is the legal reason here for what the government is explaining to you why they're doing this?
How are they justifying it?
Yeah, the government, as far as we understand it, is relying on a rarely used provision in immigration law to justify the detention of a lawful permanent resident in his placement and removal proceeding. It is a provision that basically says that if the Secretary of State determines that a non-citizen's presence or activity in this country poses a serious risk of adverse foreign policy consequences potentially, that person can be processed for removal. Now, of course, that provision is not only rarely used, it is certainly not intended by Congress to be used to silence dissent. In other words, the times that it has been used to, for example, prohibit the visas for folks who have, people who have interfered with democracy in their home countries, former officials. Those are the kinds of scenarios where you see that law used. It is not intended to be used to silence pro-Palestinian speech or any other speech that the government happens to dislike. And for that reason, we believe that this case is not going to set the precedent that the government wants it to set, whether it's in federal court or an immigration court. And you already know just by looking behind you that it's not having the effect that the government wants it to have on, people's solidarity with Palestinians.
Please repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question was whether we can confirm that he sent an email to the president of Columbia University the night before he was arrested and detained to basically put the university on notice that he was feeling unprotected by the university and that he was worried about detention by ICE and doxing and actions by private actors. He was in fear for his life and well-being. That is accurate. He did send that email to the head of Columbia University, and I think his email raises an important question. This is a university that has spent the better part of the last year talking about its duty to protect students and to keep them safe. But in a scenario where numerous students are being approached by ICE on Columbia's campus, and one Columbia student, Mahmoud Khalil, has been effectively disappeared by U.S. government agents, again, on Columbia's property, the university has been remarkably absent and silent.
Can you